Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Wargiven Racing Hub for another racing recap. This time it is the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix that we are recapping. Uh, it was certainly an interesting race, to say the least. Interesting weekend for F1 and, the new cars, with all of which we will talk about in today's episode. So, hopping right into the standard track background, it was the second race yesterday at the Jeddah Corniche circuit with 27 turns and 3 different DRS zones. The track is 3.8 miles, and the race was 50 laps. Last year's race, obviously, as mentioned in the preview, was the second to last race of the season and had lots of controversy relating mainly due to the on-track shenanigans between the two championship contenders, and how that all played out. And then this year's tire compounds was the C4 soft, C3 medium, C2 hard, of which we didn't see the soft at all in the race, and it was mainly a battle between the medium and hard tires in this specific race. So, looking at our top 10 finishers, we have Max Verstappen taking the victory for Red Bull Racing and the first victory for Red Bull Powertrains. Charles Leclerc, after battling with Verstappen throughout the second half of the race, comes home second, only, I believe it was 6/100ths of a second behind. Charles Leclerc, wow, Carlos Sainz bringing home third place in his Ferrari, followed by the second Red Bull of Sergio Perez. George Russell fifth, Esteban Ocon sixth, Lando Norris a good day, finishing seventh in his McLaren. Pierre Gasly eighth, Kevin Magnussen ninth, and Lewis Hamilton 10th. K-Mag and Lewis kind of got caught out. Lewis more so than Magnussen on strategy. Gasly apparently was battling an intestinal pain throughout the second half of the race. So impressive that he managed to not only finish the race, but finish in the points. Lando Norris capitalizing on the situation around him to get seventh place. Esteban Ocon, who had, I'd say, an extremely good day, but some costly time lost with his teammate early on in the race probably sunk his chances at getting into the top 5. George Russell, a solid day, capitalizing on the kind of, I don't want to say lack of Mercedes pace, but he capitalized on the fact that the Mercedes is quicker than the Alpine, but then not as quick as the Red Bull and Ferraris, and with no Red Bull or Ferrari drama in terms of retirements, finishing fifth is all that he could do. Sergio Perez, obviously unlucky to drop back to fourth after being very strong to start the race. And then Carlos Sainz, just like in Bahrain, qualified close, but just was off Leclerc's pace throughout the day. So now we go into the notable moments. The start of the race was, again, rather boring. This is the second race in a row that we have had no retirements in the first corner or on the first lap, as Perez held on to the lead and actually pulled out a 1.5 second lead by the time he came in for his first stop. On lap 5, we got treated to a very interesting battle between the two Alpines with Bottas and Magnussen behind them. And this lasted for a few laps. I believe it was up until lap 8, where Alonso finally established himself in front, and then Ocon actually was under extreme threat from Bottas because of how slowed up they got. And honestly, this battle between the two Alpines, it was clean for the most part. I mean, there was a questionable swerve by Ocon, but then again, I didn't think there was room for Alonso to go down the inside on the pit wall anyways. But it cost them 7-8 seconds to Russell in fifth. And honestly, I think Alonso, especially in the early part of this race, could have challenged the Mercedes for that position. In terms of strategy early on in the race, everyone was on the mediums with the exception of Kevin Magnussen, Nico Hulkenberg, and Lewis Hamilton. Daniel Ricciardo pit, I believe, around lap 10 to get a jump, but that didn't really work out because of what happens later on. But on lap 15, Perez pits because Ferrari came out, and so Perez pitted to cover, and then Charles stayed out, which immediately had repercussions as coming out of the final turn, Nicholas Latifi crashed his Williams coming out of the hairpin, and that caused a safety car, meaning Charles Leclerc got the lead, followed by Verstappen, and then a slight controversy over who crossed the safety car line first, Carlos Sainz, who was able to double stack behind Leclerc, or Perez, who was still on track, obviously, as he had pit the previous lap. Although it wasn't sorted out under safety car, Perez did give Sainz the position on the restart. And that happened on lap 21 with Hamilton and Magnussen now firmly in the top 10, but they chose to stay out on their hard tires and get a little bit of track position, which worked out for Lewis as he was running 6th, holding off the Alpines behind him. And then Magnussen dropped back a little bit. I believe Magnussen was running around P10 before the next big incident, which was on lap 30. So on lap 35, Valtteri Bottas comes in for what I was assuming was just he was going for a two-stop strategy. But then we see Fernando Alonso start to slow. But he's crawling around the track. So, we're going to go to VSC, and it's going to be fine. But then Daniel Ricciardo stops near the pit entrance. And the pit lane isn't closed, so Valtteri Bottas pulls in and retires his car. And it seems like all of these cars just overheated their powertrains, and it just shut off. So there was no spectacular engine, explosion. It wasn't like Gasly last week where he simply started to brew up. It was kind of strange. But because Ricciardo at the time was not blocking pit entry, and neither was Fernando Alonso, Kevin Magnussen and Nico Hulkenberg were able to get into the pits. However, Lewis Hamilton was not able to, as he, possibly fearing a repeat of 2020 Italian Grand Prix, was not told either in time or felt he had the time to pit. So he was left out on extremely old hard tires, needing to make his pit stop to change the tire compound very late in the race. And that kind of ruined his strategy, as when he eventually did that, it forced him behind Albon, I think. So he was in 11th or 12th. But on lap 41, the race resumed, and because it was only a VSC, the gaps weren't closed up. So it was really just a battle between Charles and Max. And boy, was it interesting. Certainly the new car works in the high-speed corners, as showed, as Max was able to stay within, I think, no more than 1.4 seconds, especially for here. And on lap 44, I believe, Max dived up the inside, but didn't have DRS down the pit straight, so Charles passed him. This was lap 42 on the 43. And then on lap 43, they're coming into the final corner, and they both slam on the brakes, obnoxiously so, and they lock up. Now, Max still had DRS, but Charles was able to not lock up as much and kind of scooted away. But it just, shenanigans, yes. Not as bad as last year. Not controversial shenanigans in terms of crashing or anything. No one made contact, but it just looked kind of funky on the TV, watching the race, seeing them both try to outbreak each other for a DRS line. I don't know. But eventually, the superior straight line speed of the Red Bull got Max pass on lap 47. And despite Charles closing up in the high speed, twisty sections, the power from the Red Bull just pulled away enough. And then to top it off and possibly add controversy, it looks like nothing has come from it, but Lance Stroll and Albon crashed going on to start lap 49 for them, which for the leaders would have been approaching the start of lap 50. And it was deemed that Albon made a dive. I thought it was more a racing incident, maybe Albon's fault, but I don't think he deserved the penalty points that he got. But we'll talk about that in a few minutes or a few seconds here. And then Max held off Charles Like I said, I think it was 6-1 Honduras. Extremely close battle. And, it was clean. It was extremely clean, which was nice to see. So the storylines, there was one safety car, one VSC. Obviously, with the first safety car, it was a VSC, then upgrade to a safety car. So I count it as only one safety car. That was for 8 laps, which was just under 20% of the race. There were 3 different leaders. Perez initially, then Leclerc, and then Max. Just poor Yuki Tsunoda. I mean, this weekend just was horrible for him. And it wasn't his fault. He had mechanical issues in FP2. He had mechanical issues in qualifying, and then on his recon laps to the grid, it just cuts out. I mean, was this a Red Bull powertrains issue? Possibly. Was this an AlphaTauri issue integrating the powertrain in? Possibly. Combination of both. That's what I'm leaning towards. But he didn't even get to start the race, although he was officially classified as a DNF. Then we had Mick Schumacher, who, didn't even make the grid because of his horrifying crash, which we'll get into in the last point here. But so we only had 18 cars start this race, and only 13 finished, because of that string of retirements in that middle part, and then the crash in the final laps. But Checo gets unlucky. I mean, brilliant play by Ferrari, duping Red Bull into pitting Checo early. I mean, he got caught out. It sucks. He was looking pretty rapid to start the race. And maybe that was, Checo pushing a bit too hard, the Ferraris conserving their tires. I don't know. It just looked like Checo could have won another race, his third race. It didn't work out. And then he wasn't able to get close enough to Sainz by the end of the race. Probably because the Red Bull had more tire wear than the Ferrari. But then this builds on to the next point. The cars worked in the high-speed corners. I mean, even early on the race when Checo was leading, it was really no more than a second and a half, 2 seconds. Maybe 2.5 seconds at most, but then Charles started clawing it back. And, it was nice to see that the cars could follow. And it makes me look forward to, Spa, Monza. What other high-speed tracks do we have? Canada. Australia in 2 weeks. Like, it's encouraging that these cars are working so well. And honestly, Monaco could be exciting because these cars don't drive very well in low-speed corners. So we could see some wrecks. And I think Monaco's going to be interesting in that aspect. I hope F1 brings the softest tires. And honestly, I kind of wish they had a C, what would it be, a C6 tire? Where they go ultra soft. The old ultra soft tires. I want multiple stops in Monaco, but that's just me. Anyway, it's strange that 3 engines of 3 separate power plants all had overheating issues in the span of 2 or 3 laps. That was just odd. And F1 Twitter compared it to Cars 2 with Aramco and Alanol and the laser TV ray gun that popped the all-in-all fuel in the cars, which I found funny, being a kid that grew up on the Cars franchise. So I found that quite entertaining to see on Twitter. But it was really odd. I mean, how do you overheat? I guess it's the new car packaging. I guess. But anyways, that, certainly, changed the dynamic, and that it allowed Verstappen to save his tire wear. I guess it kind of like the Toyota Alpine battle in the 1,000 miles of Sebring the previous week, where the Alpine was quicker, but the Toyota had better long-term pace because of its bigger fuel tank. This was kind of hit here on tire wear. Ferrari had the better overall stint where, but Red Bull was quicker. So this was just an example of those 3 or 4 laps under VSE really saved Max, in my opinion, because he didn't have the tire fall off that he would have if he had to push those extra laps. But yeah, and then Albon gets 2 penalty points and then a 3-place grid penalty. I agree with the grid penalty after watching it back. Initially, I thought Stroll turned across, and I still think Stroll did turn a little bit across. He should have expected the dive, but then looking at the footage, Albon wasn't making the corner, so he definitely deserved the grid penalty. I don't think it was a dangerous move. I don't think it was an actively seeking to crash move, or a hazard to the safety of the drivers beyond a normal crash. So that's why I think the 2 penalty points was kind of too much. Maybe 1 penalty point. Or honestly, I probably would have preferred a 5-place grid penalty, honestly, for the next race. Not that it's going to matter much. I think the Williams will qualify in the back 5, as it's going to a high-speed track, which it didn't suit them here, and it didn't suit them at Bahrain. So who knows? And then we get to the juiciest part of the storylines here, the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix future. So start off, free practice 1, it was okay. You saw encouraging signs of the cars being able to follow, but you also saw the high speed nature that I guess I wasn't expecting. But then at the end, Max Verstappen complains about the smell of smoke. He thought it was his car, when in reality, it's this big black plume of fire and burning oil that is 6 miles from the circuit because a missile fired by Yemeni rebels, of which the Saudi government it does not support and has actively fought against in the past few years for the Yemeni civil war, had a missile launched by that group had struck an Aramco major F1 sponsor facility less than 10 kilometers, 6 miles from the track. And I know no one was fortunately no one was hurt, either at the facility or F1 wise. But you cannot cancel a Grand Prix in Russia because of their active warfare against Ukraine, stand against it, and then ignore what Saudi Arabia is doing. I guess F1 has set the precedent where they still raced in Russia with the proxy war going on in the Donbass region, and they were treating Saudi Arabia as kind of the same. But missiles fired from Ukraine were not landing in the Olympic Park in Sochi. And maybe that's hypocritical, but F1, you need to, at the very least, move out of missile range of these rebels. But then again, where was it? Is it Riyadh? The Saudi capital got hit. The street circuit got hit last year during the Formula E race there. And obviously, it's too late to cancel that because it was the second race, and it was during the race. So you can't cancel the race, really, because it's already started. But here it was a Friday. This race should have been canceled from that. I mean, I guess that's just me. Not even I'm ignoring the human right aspect here because I think you can make an argument for practically every country on the F1 calendar that they have violated human rights currently, in the past 50 years, or whenever. You could argue that for practically every country on the calendar. So ignoring the human right aspect, which F1 has realistically always ignored, it wasn't safe for them to be there. The circuit wasn't safe to drive. I mean, Mick Schumacher had an 170-mile-per-hour crash on a street circuit. Not on a straight, on a twisty section of track. And it's a miracle that he wasn't hurt. Not even with a concussion. So, this circuit is a great layout. Initially, I was skeptical. With the last generation, I was very skeptical of the layout with the cars, the dirty air, and you saw that in last year's race. The dirty air really hurt the track. Really hurt the racing. But this year, the racing was good. I wouldn't go as far as great or fantastic, but it was good, and when two cars were pretty equally matched, they were able to follow. But there's no runoff. It's a street circuit. And you may be like, oh, but Baku has that ridiculously long straight, and they're going extremely fast. Yes. But Baku, the angles that you hit really is the chicane that's built in, the high-speed chicane that Stroll crashed in last year because of a tire failure, not him getting loose on a curb. And you saw with Max's, the way concrete barriers are designed is on a straightaway is to deflect the car. It is very rare for a car to hit 90 degrees in a Formula car rather than a stock car. That's why stock cars have safer barriers on ovals, is because they get turned. Same with Indy cars. They get turned into the barriers. That's why they're safety barriers. F1 doesn't have that contact. So long straights aren't an issue on street circuits. High-speed straights aren't an issue. That's why in the first turn at Baku, you have a ridiculous amount of runoff. If a car loses braking, they can go down that runoff. There's no such runoff at Saudi Arabia. Sure, turn 1 has a little bit. Turn 27 has probably the safest amount. Turn, I think it's 10, the bank corner, has a decent amount. But the rest of the twist and turn, if they get it wrong, 1 centimeter, and it's thrilling to watch, but at the same time, it's not safe. If this was a road course, a standard road course with, elevation and gravel or grass, I'd be completely different. This is a great layout. Honestly, this layout is fantastic with the new car. But it being a street circuit, serious safety questions need to be asked about, is it safe to drive? Because these cars are only going to get faster. We are seeing this generation of cars at its slowest right now because it's its first year. They're going to get faster. They're going to harness ground effect into making these extremely quick machines. And that is not safe on this circuit. It's too high speed. Its average speed is too high. And its runoff is not sufficient. So if they take this layout and they make it into a purpose-built facility, which is reportedly what's going to happen, not this layout, the permanent facility, that was the plan, sure, build it. Build it in an area that won't get hit by missiles and that has proper runoff and safety features. Does it suck that we have to talk about this? Yes. Because the race was good. Borderline great. I gave it a 4.25 out of 5. It showed the potential of these cars. It showed that we have two teams that will fight for the championship. It also shows the danger of not anticipating that the car design actually will work at a high speed that is pretty close to what the speeds were last year in terms of race pace. And so that's where F1 has to look at moving this track. They have to move it. They have to move it for a safety standpoint, both from external threats and the driver's safety in terms of on-the-track action. They don't need to change the layout. They need to make the layout safer. by going somewhere and building this layout safely with runoff, with gravel, with extra tarmac, as much as I hate that. I prefer gravel and grass, but extra tarmac, sure. And again, I know I'm ignoring the human rights aspect, but F1 is a business, and businesses make decisions that they feel is in their best interest. So they got a good race in a questionable country for lots of money. That's a win for them. But they need to do, and I'm gonna hammer this if they don't change this for next year. They need to change this circuit for the driver safety, for the spectator safety, for the marshal safety, for the overall safety of everyone there, so that they don't get hit by a rogue missile fired by a rebel group that the Saudi government is trying to suppress. And I'm not getting into whether the Saudis should be trying to suppress them or not. That's not the talk of this. This is about the circuit, its location, and F1. And so it sucks that we have to have this conversation. It sucks that Mick Schumacher wasn't able to race in this race because of the features of this track. Where a improper curb, because they didn't foresee that, because the aerodynamics of this car will be focused under the car, that these cars will stall on the curbs more than last year's cars did. If this car had taken last year's curb just like that, it would have been fine. It would have gotten loose. It would have wrecked. It wouldn't have wrecked at 170 miles an hour. It wouldn't have snapped so drastically. So, F1, Stefano Domenicali, the new FIA directors, you have to move this circuit for safety of everybody, both on track, from external threats. You have to do it. And if that costs you a lot of money and you earn less money from the Saudi government, that's, in my opinion, okay. Because you need to have a safer environment for these drivers and teams to come. Because this race should have been canceled because of a missile strike and because of the horrible crash hadn't happened. It should have been canceled in the first place because of the missile strike. But the horrible crash shows that this circuit was not safe to drive at all. And that these drivers were legitimately risking their life for sports entertainment beyond an acceptable risk, in my opinion. But moving on from that, we take a look at the drivers and constructor standings. We actually have 14 drivers that have already scored, which to me is insane. Obviously, Sebastian Vettel isn't on here because he hasn't raced yet due to COVID and the side effects. Hopefully we see him on Australia. But Charles has a 12-point lead now over his teammate. Max, obviously, with his win, jumps into third. George is in fourth because of his fifth-place finish. Esteban Ocon jumps to sixth. Perez, seventh because of his fourth-place finish. Lando Norris finishing seventh gets him into the top 10. That's really it. Obviously, there's some movers around because of retirements of Bottas and, Tsunoda and Alonso. And then in the constructors, Ferrari's running away at the moment, obviously, as, they've had 4 podiums of the 6, so they're doing extremely well to start the season. Red Bull now moves into contention against Mercedes. I still think Mercedes is going to bounce back. I mean, if you remember my predictions, Lewis Hamilton's going to win the title, still in my opinion. He's only 29 points back. At points last year, he was farther back. Granted, his car was closer to the Red Bull than I think his car is to the Ferrari right now. But I think Mercedes is going to pull something off. I don't think Ferrari can keep it up across the whole season. I think this 50-point lead is pretty safe at the moment. And I don't think they're going to drop way off the pace. But, I think it's going to be pretty close between the top 3 teams. And then Alpine, I thought McLaren was going to have the 4th fastest car, but Alpine, I think, has it. They've got the reliability, more or less. They've got the speed. They've got the qualifying pace and the race pace, and they've got the driver lineup. They keep that team in fourth place. So good for Alpine, a positive step up, and I think they'll compete for podiums on some tracks. I think Monaco, we could see them up there fighting for a podium. Lewis Hamilton, I guess I didn't really mention. He had a horrible weekend. This shows that Lewis Hamilton, arguably the best, or most certainly one of the best drivers in F1's history, when he, just like every other driver, when he doesn't get a setup right and they just can't figure out the setup, and that happens. Everybody has bad weekends. He just couldn't find the setup, so he was off the pace. Happens. I don't think that big of a deal. It's crazy that this was the first time on pure pace that he didn't make it out of Q1 since 2009. That, I think, is a bigger deal than him struggling, because everybody struggles. So I think he's going to bounce back. I don't think he's going to be well off the pace, washed. If you don't like Lewis, sure, you're going to enjoy it. But, he's going to fight back. And I don't think it's going to take very long for him to start fighting back. And then moving on to my little fun, what if we use the old point system? Charles still has the lead, 4 points over his teammate. Max is now in third, George fourth, Lewis fifth, Sergio sixth, Esteban seventh, Kevin eighth, Valtteri ninth, Lando 10th, and then the two AlphaTauris tied for 11th. So we've got 12 drivers of the 20 scoring in the old points format, and then Ferrari have, run away again. 17 points between them and Red Bull. Mercedes is tied with Red Bull, but because of the win, Red Bull's second. And then we've got Alpine, Haas, Alfa, McLaren, and AlphaTauri all fighting for, the spots. And then obviously Williams and Aston haven't scored, so they're not on here. But that about does it for Saudi Arabia. Again, controversy. Don't think we're ever not going to have that at this track. But I look forward to Melbourne. New track, new car. First time for me watching the race. I thought the race started at 3, so I'm lucky. It starts at 1 a.m. Get a little bit of sleep. But yeah, that weekend's going to be nuts. It's going to have IMSA. It's going to have NASCAR. It's going to have IndyCar. It's going to have Formula One. And I think it's also has Formula E, although that may be this upcoming weekend. But, we'll cover that when it comes. Thank you so much for listening, watching, following along in my ramblings. NASCAR's COTA weekend recap or racing recap will be coming up later, in which we talk about NASCAR and their 3 series racing at an F1 track, which is always a fascinating concept/idea. So that does it for today, and I hope you enjoyed the racing this weekend in Saudi Arabia, despite the unfortunate circumstances surrounding it. Again, thought the race was a 4.25. I did not get the prediction right. Again. Oh, well. But yeah, that'll do it for today. Thank you so much for listening. As I mentioned, enjoy the racing. Find some racing to watch that's new for you. That's my challenge, as always. Enjoy it. Stay safe, everyone. And